when our kids are struggling with their mental health, there's a kind of implication always like, what aren't you doing right? I mean, it must be something you're feeding them, or, you're not putting them to bed on time. It's really so much stigma, less so now. But when we think about nutritional psychiatry, always have that circumspect view of not to blame people that, of course you have mental health problems, you're not eating well, but also not to ignore the data on food. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is our first Ask Me Anything episode of the podcast. And the first thing I want to start with is thanking all of you who've sent in so many comments and DMs, giving us suggestions, suggested guests. I really appreciate it. Thank you for sending in these questions. It's just great to be able to spend some more time together. This podcast is about mental health and mental fitness. I think you all know at this point I'm a psychiatrist, and that's what I've spent my professional life and time thinking about. I've been having a hard time doing this Ask Me Anything. I was just like taking a deep breath, trying to center down, because this is a different sort of episode. It's answering your questions a little bit more with my thoughts than with hosting all the great guests that we've had. And so I wanted to celebrate 25 episodes by just answering your questions. So let's get them started. Here we go. Relationship advice. That is great. Just starting right there. How to help someone who is struggling. How to help someone open up. And relationship advice is wonderful. Please send in all these questions. I love talking about relationships. That's as a psychotherapist on that couch. That's what I do most of the time. And so when I think about relationships, there are a lot of different aspects of them that I'm considering as a psychiatrist. Right? I'm wondering what, in some ways, purposes the relationship kind of serves for an individual, how it helps them or doesn't help them function. Psychiatry in a lot of ways and mental health, we think a lot about functioning. How do you function in an emotional relationship? So this question is, how to help somebody who is struggling. And I'm guessing this is how to help somebody who's struggling with their mental health. And how do we take this mental fitness approach that I talk about in Healing the Modern Brain? And we're talking about more and more as we want to get active in our approach to mental health. So I think, first of all, when someone's struggling, helping engage them with activities is really a big lesson for me that I've learned. As a psychiatrist, so often, a therapist, it's all about the words and getting people to talk. And that, it's certainly something that I love doing and helping people with. But when you're out there in someone's life and they're struggling, and I've certainly known this in my life when I'm struggling, it's not so much those questions, let's talk all about it. It's more doing things, engaging with people, maybe seeing other aspects of my life or of my mood that perk me up. So I think when you have someone in your life and they're struggling with their mental health, one, don't start by making too big of a deal about it. I think there's a lot of advice out there that, make a statement, tell them you notice. And one of my supervisors talks about trying to be a little bit more of a jazz musician, like a little cooler, a little smoother. It's just as great as along with asking directly if you feel compelled to spend time with people when they're struggling, to hear about their struggles. That's always you're making some progress when you're sitting with someone and they're struggling and they start to open up about it, or they say, I'm sorry, I seem down. And off they go. And now you're hearing about it. They're processing it with you. I think another way to help people open up and help people when they're struggling is give them the experience that is, I don't want to say fun. Fun's that's hard. We're talking about struggle, but give them the experience that opening up is helpful, is healing, is useful, is something that leads to a caring part of your relationship. I think a lot of times when people open about struggles, mental health struggles are a little bit like when people talk about cancer, right? That we want to avoid them, or we want to help, we want to do something, we want to have a solution. That's a really hard impulse sometimes to just sit with for a moment. It's great to be helpful, but we want to listen. And so giving people a good experience when they're struggling, that they're feeling heard, they're feeling seen. Certainly the most trouble I've gotten in with patients over the years, or where I haven't met my goal of just being an excellent clinician, is where people haven't felt heard, or they haven't felt that I really had empathy or for their experience. And so those are a couple of the thoughts I have. All the caveats apply when people are really struggling with something that feels it needs professional help. There's a severe substance use or gambling use disorder, addiction, where people are struggling with a use disorder, or there's severe symptoms, and there's a lot of confusion about what's going on. That's certainly a place where you want to get professional help. But I always come to this point where you want to have engagement around that process with the person that you care about. All right, so that's a little relationship advice. Send all the questions that you have about relationships, and the more specifics that you give me, the more specifics I'll be able to share from my experience. Thanks for that question. All right, next question is about simple swaps, which is a fundamental way we apply nutritional psychiatry. And that instead of labeling foods necessarily as like good or bad or don't eat these foods, we want to think about food and our nutrition in a couple of ways that really need to be added to the conversation for a lot of patients we meet. So often, right, food, especially from a medical perspective as a physician, it's all about calories, saturated fat, cholesterol, getting rid of salt. We can talk all about that in other podcasts and the merits of that advice, but and there is merit to lots of that advice, but there is a big problem we're having right now that people, for example, just aren't eating plants, they're not eating real foods. And so when we think about simple swaps, we're wanting to look for the low-hanging fruit, no pun intended, around where are lots of processed foods creeping into your diet, ultra-processed foods. You're going to notice this. I tell patients, when you feel that crinkle of the wrapper, it doesn't mean you have to stop, but you should pause and just think, okay, what is this? Is this a Whole Foods? Is this made of, nuts and berries and dark chocolate? Or are we getting into a more ultra-processed food? So simple swaps are about finding these things. Like, let's say you're a soda drinker and you want to move towards something. The first step might be diet soda. Now, lots of people in the wellness world will maybe have concerns about that. As a clinician out here practicing, when patients have certain tastes or flavors or cultures or values, you really have to practice that phrase that a lot of people say, but not a lot of people do, which is meeting people where they are. And so if you're drinking a lot of full calorie soda, moving towards a diet soda might be a great step. Moving towards a kombucha, right, where you're going from maybe 140 calories in a can to 50 calories in a can. And along with calories, one of the things that's interesting is you're increasing the nutrient density, not in traditional nutrients with kombucha. There's certainly some good stuff in there, but with live bacteria. So that's a great example of a simple swap, right? It's hard to get all excited about kombucha here. It's like 7 a.m. here in Wyoming. I'm just like halfway through my first cup of coffee. I'm already looking for my kombucha. So let's talk about some of the things that we utilize in simple swaps. Let's talk about some of the foods that we want you to swap out. So what we see a lot in the standard or modern American diet, it's a SAD diet or the MAD diet, right? Along with a lot of ultra-processed foods, we don't see a lot of diversity of plants. So when I think about simple swaps, I just kind of go through the major food categories in nutritional psychiatry. I read all about these in Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety and Eat Complete, both of which have recipes and go into a lot more details and also have some great illustrations that kind of highlight these foods. But let's just think about a couple. Like, let's say that, you're somebody who is eating a lot of macaroni and cheese. Now, I have children. This is a common thing. So we have a kale mac and cheese that our kids absolutely adore. We adore it. It gets a lot of kale in there. We're not like hiding the kale, but it's a great way of consuming kale, and it's a great way of consuming macaroni and cheese. So this is an example of a simple swap where I guess a lot of healthcare advice tells us no more macaroni and cheese. I don't find that to be very practical advice. It's kind of like healthcare advice was like nutrition advice was like no more bread. It's like that's not going to work for me. I think bread's fascinating, interesting, lovely. So when we think about simple swaps, think about foods in your dietary pattern. And again, I would note or be cautioned around ways that we're often way too harsh about these things. But things that you're struggling with, things that come to mind right now as you're listening, and think about ways to swap those out for a whole food alternative. So a couple other examples: a cheeseburger, I like a nice grass-fed or bison cheeseburger, but swapping that out for a wild salmon burger. Great wild salmon burger and Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. Great recipe. Why? Well, you've had lots of cheeseburgers likely last year, so have I. You probably didn't have too many wild salmon burgers. And in doing that, you're really shifting the fatty acid profile from that protein to one of, even with the best, highest quality grass-fed meats, you're going to get a lot more kind of saturated fats and cholesterols. And most importantly, you're not going to be getting those long-chain omega-3 fats that we get in the wild salmon. So that's a great example of a simple swap. Another simple swap, I guess, would be taking something like iceberg lettuce. Hey, I'm a fan of a wedge salad, and swapping out for more a darker leafy green, like an arugula or a collard or a kale, or a nice lacinato kale, like cut real thin, or a cabbage, right? Why? Nothing wrong with a wedge salad or iceberg lettuce. It's just not as nutrient dense as those darker, leafier greens. So a simple swap there, you're just going to up the nutrient density. You're probably going to spend the same amount of money. You're going to get more nutrition, more nutrients, more vitamins, more minerals. So those are the ideas of simple swaps. We're just not trying to deprive ourselves. Oh, the classic simple swap. The classic simple swap was when I was doing press for the Happiness Diet, my very first book. And I got asked by a journalist, like, give me an example of this nutritional psychiatry thing. And she said, for example, I love white chocolate covered pretzels. What should I eat instead? And I thought this is such a great example because white chocolate is, it's horrible. White chocolate's like it's all the goodness of chocolate taken out, and just it's not even chocolate. It's nothing to do with chocolate. And then a pretzel. I like a pretzel, but it's mainly just sort of empty calories, classic ultra processed food. So thinking, what do you like about this white chocolate covered pretzel? And this journalist said, well, I like the crunch. I like that it's a treat. It's sweet. And I thought, a dark chocolate covered almond. And now you're getting like two great brain foods. You're getting an almond, wow, packed with vitamin E, and it's like a little packet of olive oil in there, and dark chocolate, wonderful for the brain, really interesting. All these theobromines, all these stimulating molecules that you find in cacao and chocolate. So the simple swap is moving from that white chocolate covered pretzel to a dark chocolate covered almond. We're moving towards a whole food. We're moving towards more nutrient density, more real foods in your diet. Classic simple swap. All right, so those are a few of the simple swaps. The soda for diet soda or kombucha. The thinking about, instead of maybe a cheeseburger, a wild salmon burger, thinking about darker leafy greens, just as some examples. There are more on a free download that's on my website, drewramseymd.com, so you can check that out as well. And make sure and drop in the comments simple swaps that have worked for you. All right, let's move on to some other questions. Why is everyone talking about ketogenic diets and mental health these days? It's a really great question. Right now, 2024, people are talking a lot about it based on the psychiatry research paper by Shabani Sethi and her group. It's a metabolic psychiatry group at Stanford University. They've published the first pilot trial, really well-controlled trial, not randomized. It's a single-arm trial, but they took 21 individuals, 16 of whom had bipolar disorder, and 5 of whom had schizophrenia. And they put them on a ketogenic diet with some coaching and just really had wonderful results in terms of the metabolic health and psychiatric health of these individuals. Now, it's a single arm trial. We need a lot more research. That trial kind of stands on the foundation that's been established maybe over the last decade of a few individuals really promoting this notion of ketogenic diets, not just for health, but for mental health. The ketogenic diet, again, is where we're eating most of our calories coming from fat. So ketogenic diets are the basis of Chris Palmer's book, Brain Energy, and also the basis of a lot of the research being funded by the Bazooki Foundation, which is really dedicated to uncovering more about how ketogenic diets can be used. Is a ketogenic diet right for you? My sense is the first step for a lot of people, or where a lot of people are struggling, isn't going to be helped necessarily by moving right to a ketogenic diet. That's not how I eat or how we recommend eating in our clinic. We think a little bit more around the evidence around a Mediterranean diet and thinking more working with patients with depression and anxiety. However, having patients eat fewer refined carbohydrates, fewer sugars, that's been a general, I would say, recommendation that most of us in the nutrition and wellness and health space have been having. And so ketogenic diet's super interesting. Lots of research questions in there. I got a great question by a resident, the University of California, I think Irvine, Child and Adolescent Psychiatry program, where I was zooming in and talking about nutritional psychiatry, and he asked, what's the research around just giving ketones? If ketones are therapeutic, if they're anti-seizure, if they're anti-manic, if they're helpful to the brain in some way, can we just give patient ketone esters? Because you can take ketones. So there's lots of ways that this is super exciting to me as a nutritional psychiatrist, because there's more conversation going on, thinking like how we eat, how does what we eat and what lifestyle changes we make, how does that really affect our mental health and our brain health? How can we have powerful interventions that really change the narrative for someone's mental health? So really exciting space, exciting to share more of this research. I'll do a deeper dive at this paper here very soon. Our next question, what is mental fitness? Thanks for asking. Mental fitness is a new term that's been popping up over the last, let's say, decade. And it's really thinking about how we can take care of our mental health in a day-to-day way. Oftentimes we think about mental health as this thing we want to avoid, or people aren't going to come and see someone like me, a psychiatrist or a therapist, until things are really bad or people hit rock bottom. We really don't want that. We want to be out there thinking about our mental health. And mental health is really the most important aspect of our health. Nothing feels right when our mental health is off, as everybody listening knows. And so mental fitness, as I define it, is the knowledge, patterns, habits, and skills that culminate in a more enjoyable, more mentally sound life. Now, that's from my new book, Healing the Modern Brain. There's also an e-course, Healing the Modern Brain. And this is an effort to identify the different regions of your life that make the biggest impact on your mental health. So as you're thinking about, what maybe therapy would offer for you, really putting this in a framework of self-awareness. Like growing your self-awareness is a fundamental piece of mental fitness, because it allows you to reflect on the self, to better understand your mind, your psyche, your character. It allows you to better actualize change and really all other aspects of mental fitness. So that's an example of one of those attributes. In terms of knowledge, so much to understand about our mental health and how to improve and promote our mental health. As a psychiatrist, that's what I love to think about and love to talk about. That's what this whole podcast is really about, and why I'm really grateful to have you here listening, thinking about your mental health, how these ideas apply to you, how, all of us are on our own individual journey, seeking out, thinking about mental health. But knowing that we're in it together is very helpful to me, especially when I'm struggling, especially when I see my patients struggling. It's that hope that we all need, that connection that we all need. So that is mental fitness. There are 9 core tenets of mental fitness that I'm describing and looking at all of the research in this new book. I'm talking about it right now because I just turned it in last night. It's just going up on Amazon. We're just looking at all the covers. It's really an exciting time to be thinking about mental fitness and thinking about how every day there are opportunities for us. Sometimes they're so simple. They're smiling to someone, or shaking someone's hand, or complimenting someone, or going out for lunch with a friend or a colleague instead of staying in. There are so many things for us to do that can improve our mental health when we engage in those. Again, this idea that there's knowledge, there are patterns in our lives, there are habits we engage in, and there's skills that we need. And these, when we really take them seriously and have fun with them and are playful and creative, this leads to a much more enjoyable, more mentally sound life. And it best prepares us for whatever bumps are coming our way, whatever mental health challenges we have. That's mental fitness. Carb cravings and how to curb them. Carb cravings are a big part of people struggling with their mental health. Often anxiety and depression both have a really significant carbohydrate craving component. It's something that happens to individuals, especially later at night. I'm just going to go grab Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, not to self-promote, but it's got a great illustration by Katrin Kristen, who illustrated the book. And it all about carb craving. So when we think about carbohydrate craving, there's a couple of cool deep science pieces that come to mind that I've been fascinated by, which is how tryptophan, which is an amino acid, is the basis of serotonin and also the basis of melatonin, right? We take tryptophan and we turn it into serotonin, and then in the pineal gland, we turn serotonin into melatonin. So this amino acid, tryptophan, is really special. And tryptophan probably relates to carbohydrate craving in some ways. Carbohydrate craving also is signaling hunger. Carbs and sweetness are safe calories in the primitive brain. And so when I think about carbohydrate craving as a psychiatrist, there are a couple of medications that we use to help out with this. Naltrexone, which is an opioid blocker. It's used in alcohol use disorder. We also use it for carbohydrate craving. It's half of one of the weight loss medications. I think it's Contrave. They combine Wellbutrin, which is bupropion, and naltrexone. So Wellbutrin is an antidepressant used for smoking cessation, works on the dopamine system mostly, and causes some appetite reduction and a little bit of weight loss. And naltrexone is, as I said, it blocks the opioid response. And so part of the way to understand that is like in your brain, that it is blocking some of the pleasure associated with carbohydrates. And so as you're working to curb those, that can help for some patients very much. Sorry to get like deep into psychopharm here, so I'm like looking for my food-based solutions. That's what it's like inside my brain. I'm always thinking about ways to make the carbohydrates more nutrient dense. So, for example, if you're a carbohydrate craving in my house yesterday, which I was doing some edits, a little stressed out. We had a bunch of bananas in the house, and my daughter made some really yummy banana bread muffins. But to increase the nutrient density, I'm sure you're going to guess some of my moves. I want to increase the fiber. I'm going to put some flax in there and some chia. I want to increase the healthy fats and proteins in there. So she added in some chopped nuts. Of course, I'd love some dark chocolate in there, both for some sweetness, but again, to get all those phytonutrients that are in the cacao plant. And so that's a good example of, I'm a fan of carbohydrates and sweetness, but I want them to be nutrient dense. And there's a great illustration here in Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety, all about brain food for carb craving. So these are some of the solutions that I have liked and have found helpful with patients over the years. So brain food for carb craving, this illustration from Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety. A lot of carbohydrate craving is later in the evening. It's where when people are struggling with carbs, struggling with alcohol, early bedtime, get into bed with the book, no phone. Great intervention. Some of the other interventions or other ideas in the brain food for carb craving, think about like a banana, or think about how to get something really nutrient dense, or something like gnocchi that you eat a little bit more slowly. But if you, for example, make the gnocchi, refrigerate it, pull it out and heat it up, you now have a resistant starch. And so I think that's another recommendation when you have carb craving, is thinking, how do you get more resistant starches? How do you not just get this big sugary load? And especially avoid things like liquid sugars where you can get a lot of it quickly. So responding, like another one on the list that I like a lot is a cup of herbal tea, where you can sit and really try and settle into, for example, chamomile or fennel, right? And just really try and be with yourself and let go of the carbohydrate craving. Try and maybe get in touch if there's a feeling underneath it, get a better touch with what that is. It's a great time to be journaling often when we're, gnashing about. So those are some of my thoughts about carbohydrate craving. Thanks for the question. I see a burrito is also on the list of brain food for carb craving. So, just also can go that route. And I guess that gives you a sense of Eat to Beat Depression and Anxiety a little bit. And that, if you've just got to go out for the burrito, call a friend, go out for the burrito. That's how I handle carbohydrate craving. All right, let's get to a few more of your questions. Thanks so much for these. And thanks so much again for all of your comments on the podcast episodes, for sharing them, for engaging with them and just, the encouragement. It means a lot, especially for me and for our team for these first 25 episodes. We've had such a great time talking to so many experts about gut health. When I think about, wow, we talked to like one of the godfathers of the microbiome and certainly the top researcher in nutritional psychiatry and so many great clinicians. It's just been a fun start. So your feedback's really welcome and encouraged and very helpful. So please keep sending it. All right, next question. Here we go. What's a good brain food breakfast you'd recommend? Breakfast, most important meal of the day. It's the first meal of the day, and usually I think mornings, definitely as I've gotten older, become a really special time, really sacred time, great time to journal, great time to be up before everyone else with, for me, a cup of coffee. So let's talk about breakfast. Now, when we think about nutritional psychiatry and just some of those basic principles that we want to apply to breakfast, we want to be thinking about nutrient density, getting a lot of nutrients. We want to think about a balance in the macronutrients, making sure that we're not just getting lots and lots of carbohydrates and sugars, but we're getting also fats and proteins and fiber, which are going to keep us full. We want to think about the necessity of breakfast, especially for individuals who are thinking about fasting mimicking diets or people who are in eating windows. Waking up and eating right away or being starving right away is something to pay attention to, not always really where people are or the plan that people are utilizing. And I would say something I've noticed makes a big difference. You start your day with a big, heavy breakfast. You're going to have some pancakes and a bunch of, breakfast meats and a big glass of orange juice. I think you're going to get a little schlumpy. I think there's going to be a hunger that's going to start gnawing at you because you've had a lot of carbohydrates and a lot of sugars. Now, I'm not an anti-carb guy or an anti-sugar guy necessarily. Broccoli's made of sugar, of carbohydrates. But we want to think about sugars, carbohydrates that are one in the context of a lot of fiber, i.e. plants. And for breakfast specifically, we want to think about setting you up for success for the rest of the day. And let's just start my sense of breakfast. My sense of breakfast is I wake in, I check in, I have a glass of water. It's the first thing that I do pretty much every day. I have been on the coffee train for a long time, having been a student who I loved Waffle House. I loved Waffle House. I love pulling all-nighters. I loved the drama of the all-nighter. It's like the culmination of weeks of procrastination. It was great. I've always loved the coffee. I think some moves I've moved my creamers, for example, more to half and half or cream or nothing, with the idea of, again, just getting more fat and protein and that little bit amount of nutrition or a caloric load that I'm getting early in the morning. Let's talk about breakfast, though, that could be interesting for you or ones that I see being helpful to patients. So I would say the first is thinking about the liquid breakfast of a smoothie. A lot of people like smoothies. I think people make big smoothies. They drink them too quickly. There are way too many sugars and carbs, strawberry, mango, banana thing. And we can talk smoothies. We can definitely talk about this recent science that you shouldn't put bananas in with your blueberries or dark chocolate smoothies, which just like that ruined wellness for me because I love a banana. I love the banana peanut butter dark chocolate smoothie. Let's just get into that right now. That's probably the most important thing in this podcast. I need to say this. So enzymes in plants are there to protect them. And so you have a banana and you unwrap it, and the banana is releasing all of this enzyme. Enzyme is a little protein the plant makes, and enzymes catalyze reactions. So enzymes, there's a polyphenol oxidase. It breaks down the polyphenols, these plant molecules that we like in plants. We think they're great for your health. It's what a lot of people feel have the kind of quote unquote antioxidant capacity. Not exactly how I would argue you think about them, but we can get into phytonutrients more. They're like amazing molecules in plants. Anyway. Bananas release this have this polyphenol oxidase. And so if you just take your banana and smash it, put it in the freezer, great move. You don't have to worry about this. If you just take it, smash it and sit it, they say it takes like 20 to 30 minutes for all of it to go away. So I'll just smash it, drop it in the blender. And this, my friends, allows you and me and those of us who are in the inner circle of banana-based smoothie wisdom to enjoy bananas in our smoothies. There is a peanut butter chocolate. It's a peanut butter cup smoothie and eat to beat depression and anxiety. It even has some kefir in there. So, I mean, you get chocolate, you get peanut butter, you get banana, all that potassium, all those good bugs and the lab bacteria in the kefir. And it was ruined by that piece of science. And so I just wanted to give you the fix. Thanks for taking that seriously with me. Sorry to get dramatic there. Just, these things happen. It's happened with kale. It's happened with banana smoothies, right? Where there's something that we like, we care about, we're interested in. It helps us in some ways in our wellness and mental fitness journey. And then we get like a piece of research that says we shouldn't do it. And that's always a little frustrating. I think it's always good to take a breath, learn about it, challenge our biases, think about them. All the research says that generally folks who are interested in this stuff and thinking about science also have a lot of biases that we carry around. So, man, back to breakfast. Sorry, but that was just the whole smoothie thing. So smoothies, when I think about smoothies for your breakfast, I'm thinking about nuts. That's one of my big recommendations. So you're getting fats, not a bunch of protein in nuts, but a little bit of protein in nuts. You're getting some fat-based antioxidants that are a little bit unique to nuts and a lot of often minerality and some unique things. You put almonds in there, boom, you're getting more vitamin E. You put some walnuts in there, wow, you're getting ALA, the plant-based omega-3 fat. So other things I like to see in smoothies, I just mentioned I really like seeing a fermented food in there, whether that's a yogurt or a kefir are the two that generally get used. I like kefir a little more tart, a little more sour. It also has more colony forming units. Now, I'm not so keen, and it's a bias I think we all have in a westernized culture, right? That like more is better. Like, whoa, what's better? Kefir, because it's got more good bugs, like so many good bugs, all the good bugs. And it's true, like ounce for ounce, at least per all the research I've gone with a deep dive on the internet about how many CFUs are in kefir. This is like the moment when my children just cringe, right? And it's just like, this is the problem with the AMA. You end up comfortable deep in it and letting people know that this is how you spend your time. But it's true. So going for kefir, a few ounces of kefir in your smoothie, you're going to get some good bugs. You're going to get more CFUs. You're going to get a little bit of that tart. If people in your house don't like fermented foods, but some people don't, don't force on them. Don't ruin the smoothie. So nuts, I drop some leafy greens in there when I can. I've been known to drop a little olive oil in there. I love some of these, spices and herbs that are just wonderful. So if lots of cinnamon, like a cinnamon, banana, kefir kind of thing, vanilla. So lots and lots of ways to utilize a smoothie is just a fun way to start the day. Sip them slowly. Don't guzzle. Those are my smoothie tips. That's one breakfast. Wow, that's all one breakfast. Breakfast number 2. I like thinking about eggs. Now, that's maybe a controversial statement. Everyone is concerned about LDL cholesterol, especially with, I'd just say continued, very solid expanding database around LDL and the risk of heart disease and the atherosclerotic plaque load. So we're going to get into that whole ball of wax at some point on the podcast, but that's not exactly the corner of mental fitness that we live in. Why do I like eggs? I like eggs because eggs are the perfect protein. I like eggs because you scramble them up with veggies and bang, now you're eating more veggies. I like eggs because they tend to go down easy in children and adults. And I like eggs also because the main concern with eggs is all of their dietary cholesterol. They're eating a lot of cholesterol. And as you may know, that most of the cholesterol floating around in your bloodstream you make in your liver. My understanding is that the dietary cholesterol, the cholesterol that you eat, doesn't have a huge impact on your dietary, the lipid panel levels, your LDL level. I'm not here to be your lipid expert, but I do like to recommend eggs. There are a few nutrients, and I say nutrients of interest / controversy, like choline. Choline is such a great nutrient. We talked a little bit about choline with Dr. Elena Ivanina, the integrative gastroenterologist who's quadruple board certified. And the idea around dietary choline for people who have certain bacteria in their gut, really now they're being kind of like a very clear evidence about how choline and TMAO can be involved in heart disease. It's hard to just say eggs, right? Eggs. I think eggs for breakfast sometimes are great. Next, I like a yogurt bowl with some berries, just a little bit of granola. I find the granola adds a nice texture. Again, getting a granola with lots and lots of different nuts and plants in there, great. And again, increases the nutrient density, increases the plant diversity in your diet. I'm a fan of peanut butter toast or almond butter toast. Again, I like to just, instead of jam or honey, I just put like raspberries or berries on there often. I am a fan of the forager breakfast, as I call it in my books and in my house. Forager breakfast is where you are being efficient and you're being clear. It's not a morning where you're going to sit down and have a journaling, mellow, relaxing entry to your day. You're up and out. Like a morning this morning, it's up. I wanted to get here before I started seeing patients all day, have my coffee, and get these answers out to you. And so forager breakfast is grabbing a handful maybe of nuts. Like this morning I had a little pistachio. I really love the salmon jerky, or because I'm big into this food category of seafood. But sometimes, just trying to get a great dose of very pure protein. So thinking about maybe a jerky, maybe that grosses you out for breakfast, but for some people, not so much, mixes it up a little bit. So quick things where I can get a few hundred calories, a lot of nutrients, and get my day started quickly. Other things that I like for breakfast on the weekends are, as you'll see all over my Instagram, I really love to try and make the most nutrient-dense, brain-healthy waffle that exists for kids and parents out there. And anybody else who likes waffles, you don't have to be a kid or a parent to like waffles. It's just, until I had children, I didn't have a waffle iron in my house. And now I have two mini waffle irons, one that has a snowman on it, which feels out of season, but still is delicious here at any season. All right. So again, thinking nutrient density. So all of my books have recipes, and the reason is to try and help us all think about nutrient density. So using more buckwheat flour. Found a buckwheat flour I really adore. Thinking about adding in things like nuts, things like flax, chia, increasing the nutrient density of the batter, and therefore of the waffle. All right, so those are some ideas. I feel like I'm missing like a major breakfast category here. One of the things I love in terms of traveling to other places is seeing what other people have for breakfast. Especially Japan, in the last couple of years, been a couple times to Japan. Just a wonderful, wonderful way to reconceptualize breakfast. Like, you don't usually have miso soup for breakfast, but wow, then you do. All right, those are some thoughts on breakfast. I'm sure as soon as I turn this off, I'll remember the other major breakfasts that I'm forgetting. But let's move on here. What's a good way to get my husband to engage with his mental health? I'm wondering, like, who put this question in here? I think I'm pretty engaged with my mental health. So husbands, we love them, right? I work with lots of people that have husbands, and so husbands historically haven't been so engaged with their mental health as men haven't been so engaged with their mental health. And so there are a few resources that we've tried to develop to kind of contribute to this effort. A lot of people are talking about male mental health these days. I hope most of you know we have an interview series with lots of prominent men and women about male mental health, everyone from the psychiatrist to the NBA to a bunch of notable stars, Vic Blends, the barber, Kevin Love, the Surgeon General. It's called Friday Sessions. It's up on Men's Health Instagram on the Reels section. Why do we do this? We do this to normalize the conversation around mental health, right? It's just show that all of these men and women are thinking and talking to men about mental health, thinking about their own mental health. They have strategies to deal with their mental health. It's really fascinating to sit and hear some of the younger men today talk about, going to their first therapy session and what it's like thinking about mental health as a younger man today. Now, with husbands in particular, this is a really special situation, right? Because if you are, have a husband Right? You've made a vow, you've made a commitment to be with someone in sickness and in health, to help them in their struggle. I think oftentimes people are drawn to those of us who have a little struggle, wanting to help or maybe make up for some challenges or something we didn't get. We're drawn to people for all kinds of different reasons. And so um, how to first of all recognize the feelings that are being evoked by your husband who's struggling with their mental health, I think, is a first step. That oftentimes inside of us we feel frustrated, we feel enraged, we can feel really like not valued and not seen. Because what happens when you're struggling with your mental health? Often with men, they're depressed, quiet, drinking too much, irritable. They kind of don't respond from a place of kindness, are kind of shut down. And so over time, this creates a situation where you're not going to want to engage. And then over time, this creates a lot of resentment and people not communicating effectively and really getting very, very far away from, what the construct, what the agreement, what the ideas of this relationship were about. And so when you're thinking about your husband's mental health, along with the feelings that people have inside of them, I think one of the others that's really challenging is you want someone to just take care of themselves, right? Just show up in this relationship like with your mental health. And everyone's very different in terms of how they think about their role in terms of another person's mental health. I'm a psychiatrist, like I want to hear all about your mental health. Other people really think, that's your business. Like show up into this relationship, into this marriage with your mental health taken care of. So understanding your marriage, your relationship, if we're not talking about a marriage in terms, is it a marriage and a relationship that's really about supporting and helping you out with your mental health, or is not been so much the part of the conversation. If you're an individual that shares a lot about your mental health and you haven't been hearing a lot of response or hearing a lot about your husband's mental health, there's a common thing, right? Where we have this kind of stereotype that, especially in a kind of heteronormative, we're talking about like women are going to express their feelings and emotions, and men are going to kind of listen and not say much. I think this trope is quite cliche and getting kind of old. It's certainly true, but I have not really ever, men are super sensitive creatures. I've not really met any men ever that I've ever sat with who don't, I don't know, at some point start talking to me about really, really powerful emotional stuff. So I think we want to move away from this notion that, men don't have interesting, rich, wild, emotional lives. They do. They're very sensitive creatures. So if your husband's not talking, one way to think about that is that your husband is wounded and that he doesn't feel comfortable talking, or he doesn't have the words to talk. Or, as a lot of men tell me, they've had the experience that they share things. Sometimes they don't share them so well, but they share things and then it gets used against them. They say something and it comes back with a lot of aggression, a lot of rage. And so they use this often as a justification or kind of rationalization to not share as much, not say as much in a relationship. And so, if that's happened to you in your relationship, we often want that to be better, but we don't want to actively repair it. We don't want to actively address it. It just gets especially sometimes fatiguing in relationships. But, that's one of the ways that certainly you can help someone when they're struggling is to recognize those moments, especially if they've come up, if there's been a verbalization, I used to share, but you did, or you said, or, really kind of trying to unpack that in some way and heal that, move past that. That is another barrier I often see in the way of men who are struggling getting help. All right, let's get, long-winded answer here. Pedal to the metal. Let's just think about quick things then. So other quick ways to help men who are struggling, especially if you and this husband of yours are in a cantankerous situation, discreetly mobilizing some of the other resources. If this is a person who's really close with friends and family, nudging discreetly that they should do a little outreach to your husband. I think that can be very helpful. Getting them active. I mean, this is like getting depressed, struggling husbands moving. That's like it's like a whole book in itself. But it's worth the effort, because once you get us moving, yeah, we're a little perkier. It's exercise is just great for men of any age, any state of health and mental health. So getting someone moving again. I guess my point is that sometimes we go at mental health like head on, right? And you don't think about getting your husband into like a softball league, or getting him to, like, I don't know, take the car out of the garage and go to like a car show with some friends, or just go for a hike in the woods with the dog. That these are mental health interventions. I think that's where I really hope the framework of mental fitness really appeals to families, but to men and women, where we're thinking, okay, like, what do we do? What do we do for our mental health? And now there are these, like, really these 9 core areas to look to. It says, if we really look at the research, like, where does mental health come from? How do we keep it? How do we make it grow more robustly? We want to engage in a set of, it's pretty clear. Some of them we all know, right? You want to have a certain stance on sleep and sleep hygiene, a certain respect and value for that. You want to think about your nutrition in new ways based on some of the new science, including nutritional psychiatry, and how you conceptualize food and nutrition and nourishment. Husbands. Yeah. Thanks for the husband questions. I love talking about male mental health. Also, when I say, let's just talk about some of the practical matters, it's important to talk male mental health and to be frank. And I think this always helped me when people are frank with me about how I seem, is because it really pushes that question of what to do about it, and it forces us to confront it in some ways that everyone, it's not just men, everyone's good at avoiding, improving, or taking care of their mental health. So letting this whoever asks this question, letting your partner know that you care about them, it's coming from a place of love, especially if you guys are in a tense or cantankerous or argumentative situation and their mental health is bad. That's a hard thing to say, but it's really important to marshal that. And then thinking about resources. Oh, and perspectives and biases. That's the other thing people often miss, is like they make mental health like, oh, you've got to go see a therapist, you've got to go see a psychiatrist. This is not how a lot of men conceptualize or think about their mental health. It's the last thing they're going to do. And so we don't want that to be the only way that they engage in mental health. Maybe they're going to go to a group. Maybe they're going to go on a retreat. I went to this like super powerful training for the psychedelic medicine that ended up being, for me, like almost like a little mini male mental health retreat in the middle there. I connected with a bunch of guys in some very powerful and intense ways about some traumatic stuff. So there's all kinds of ways that this can look. And I think you thinking about your husband's mental health is great. Sorry about this long-winded answer here. I hope it's helpful to you. Thinking about the resources that are available, whether it's Friday sessions or some of the great nonprofits now thinking about mental health. We're going to have one of the great male mental health leaders in my mind on his organization, Love Dad, which is about paternal postpartum depression and making sure that young families and young dads are getting the support they need for their mental health, which I just think is such a great time to intervene and orient a man and a young family towards mental health. So we'll have Kevin on here in the future. All right. We're going to get to one more question and last one here, which is how to feed your kids with ADHD. And so attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is a disorder that starts in childhood. It's a psychiatric, neuropsychiatric condition that's quite complex. It involves different subtypes, ranging from folks who are very hyperactive to people who aren't hyperactive but really struggle to focus, in complete tasks. There's a lot of associated symptoms. People often, I have patients, for example, who get injured very often or lose things, or really become kind of overwhelmed. And there are other mental health concerns, like let's say you have depression and you just kind of are losing things all the time and that you're not performing up to your ability. It's really bad for your depression when your ADHD isn't under control or treated or addressed. There's a lot of tools to treat ADHD along with medications that we have. organizational skills, organizational coaching. There's been a lot of attention around this sort of recently. So foods to feed your kids when they've been diagnosed with attention deficit disorder is it's a really potent topic in a lot of ways, really triggering topic for parents, I think, because when our kids are struggling with their mental health, there's a kind of implication always like, well, what are you, what aren't you doing right? It must be something you're feeding them, or, you're not putting them to bed on time. It's really so much stigma, less so now, but, and so we want to, when we think about nutritional psychiatry, always have that circumspect view of not to blame people that, of course you have mental health problems, you're not eating well, but also not to ignore the data on food. And so, there's been a lot of research on, for example, food dyes and ADHD. Some researchers have estimated that about 9% of the global burden of ADHD can be attributed to food dyes. So there's certainly some things that we'd want parents to cut out. That said, I hate it when I see a situation where a parent is terrified of going, I don't know, to the county fair or letting their kids go to someone's house because, they're worried. And especially if there hasn't been evidence of this, that, a little bit of this or that is really going to throw things off in a long-term way. And I'd like to remind folks that our brains and our kids' brains are very, very resilient. But overall, nutritional psychiatry, there is not a ton of evidence specifically about ADHD and food. What I would posit is that some of the challenges that we see with ultra-processed foods, which is going to be a kind of a dysregulation or a decoupling of natural appetite and filling that with whole foods, we're going to, especially with kids who have developing palates, we're going to see kind of a decoupling of what real food and food looks like and tastes like from what their brain then expects to get, very, very colorful, hyper-palatable, crunchy, extreme flavored foods. They're very stimulating for the brain. And so I hope that caveat is, yes, I think there are things to do. The general rules of nutritional psychiatry helping us all, including kids with ADHD, move towards more whole foods, real foods, more plants, helping with more seafood so we get more long-chain omega-3 fats. Thinking about helping palates develop. So, how your kids do with things like fermented foods, that's a really interesting question for a parent. Those are foods I like seeing included in my kids' diet. It's where I like seeing those foods included in kids who are struggling with mental health disorders like ADHD. And again, I hope this strikes the right tone of encouragement that food's certainly part of the equation for all mental health disorders, and certainly there's some really interesting kind of emerging ideas. Do ketogenic diets help with ADHD? Does the Mediterranean diet help the most with ADHD? A lot of my colleagues think that some supplements might help with ADHD to help with nutrients. And what about kids who are picky eaters? I have a child who's not the most robust eater in terms of his palate and the diversity of foods he eats. Is this one of those spaces where some type of supplementation is appropriate and kind of challenges my general, I'd say, view and even bias that like, hey, I think we should try and get all this from food. Anyway, great question. One of those things that we're going to be following, and we'll see if we can get some more research here in the specifics of how food and ADHD are related, and specifically what we can do as parents if we have a diagnosis like this in the house to better nourish our kids. Everyone, thanks so much for listening. It's really a treat to get to spend some time with you wherever you are thinking about mental health and mental fitness and sharing some of my thoughts based on my experience with patients and some of the research I've looked into. I hope you hear my encouragement. I hope you feel a little less alone with whatever you're struggling with. And I hope these answers help you as you think about the mental health challenges and the mental fitness goals in front of you. We'll link to some of the resources I've mentioned on the show notes. Please send in more questions. All right, this is my first AMA. Boy, it's a lot different than recording a podcast with other people. I haven't done this in a while. It's very meditative and kind of end up swimming around in my own brain with you, which I guess is the point. So I hope that was good for you. That was interesting, and I look forward to doing more of those and answering more questions. Thanks so much for listening. Please share the podcast and sign up for some of the resources on my website, drewramseymd.com. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks.